So I've talked a bit about Dr. W.D. Gaster, a Deltarune character, but I haven't actually talked about who he is. I really only glossed over him in my first video. But I realized that by doing so, I'm doing the game a huge disservice, so this video is going to be about Gaster. He's front and center. If you're curious, here he is. Or is he here? Let's just take it from the top. We are first introduced to this character in Undertale through various fun events, which show up depending on your fun value. The fun value is a random number between 1 and 100 that is generated at the start of the game. The content of each fun event varies greatly. Some are gags, others don't mean much at all, but just a handful contain important lore. The earliest relevant fun event is right here at value 65. You go up and find yourself in a sound test room. Here, you could scroll through various unused songs, including the last one, Gaster's theme, which cannot be stopped. It's as follows. Gaster can actually be found in the game's files as an unused enemy. His HP, attack, and defense is all 6s. So yeah, the number 6 is associated with him. Why? I don't know. But when you get to Hotland, you could sometimes interact with various black and white NPCs that have been called Gaster followers. These entities serve as our only form of direct knowledge about him. According to these followers, Gaster was once the royal scientist and was much more brilliant than the current Dr. Alphys, who is known for her speed. He was the one that created the core, the giant machine powering the underground, but unfortunately, his life was cut short. His experiments went wrong, and as a result, he fell into his own creation, being shattered across time and space. It is heavily implied that he's still watching over the game, though, as one Gaster follower says that it's rude to talk about someone who's listening, and another proclaims that he is holding a piece of Gaster. The only kind of context we have about Gaster's experiment that went wrong is entry number 17, which can be found by hacking into the game's files to force the player to enter a room titled room_Gaster. Here, the mysterious lab entry can be found.
Darker, yet darker. The darkness keeps growing. The shadows cutting deeper. Photon readings negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think?
And unfortunately, that's all we have. The only other thing that we had that can give us context for this darkness is a tweet from Toby Fox back in 2011, but even then it's pretty vague. We actually knew a little bit about Deltarune before it came out, as in 2015, the website Deltarune.com featured an image in Wingdings that read, "This next experiment seems very, very interesting," a direct quote of entry number 17. Wingdings is important because it's associated with Gaster, and the name WD is often implied to be abbreviation of Wingdings. A year later, the image was replaced with 3 heroes appeared to banish the angel's heaven, and on October 30th, the official Undertale Twitter account appeared to have been hacked. The profile picture was blacked out and the handle became 6 black bars. Clearly this character's Gaster, so let's see what he has to tell us.
Welcome. Have you been looking for me? How wonderful. I have been looking for you as well. I have something I want to show you, something I think you will find very, very interesting, but it is not complete yet. No, it is far from complete. Thus, I have a small favor to ask of you. Return here in 24 hours. At that time, I will ask you a few questions. Then, using your responses, we will approach its realization. Thank you so much for your time. We will be in contact again soon. Thank you for waiting so long. After all, you and I have both been waiting such a very long time, so to be here finally on the verge of connection is quite exciting. I look forward to creating a new future with you. Now show yourself, Deltarune.
When you actually play the game, Gaster's the one that introduces you in the Gonermaker sequence, prompting you to create a vessel for yourself. You customize it, name yourself, before the vessel's thrown away and it's revealed that your choices don't matter and your name is Chris. Actually, there's an ongoing discussion in the Deltarune community over whether or not the voice that discards the vessel is actually Gaster, since their typing value is completely different. The typer value is a specific value given to a character that defines their face sprite and the way they speak, and throughout the Gonermaker sequence, Gaster uses the value of 666, and the voice that discards the vessel has a value of 2, which is why it's been called the second voice, but I don't think that enough is good evidence. You see multiple characters use that type of value throughout both Undertale and Deltarune. It's used in narration, it's used by Sans before he pranks you, it's used by Ralsei, and it's used by Susie. I'm probably missing a lot of examples, but you get my point. Typer value 2 isn't specific to any one character. It's used by a bunch of characters during suspenseful moments. Now that we've gone past that mess, I think it's time that we get to everything that happens in the main game. Right off the bat, there's the prophecy that Ralsei tells us about. The prophecy mentions that 3 heroes must banish the Angel's Heaven, which is what Gaster spoke of on Deltarune.com more than 7 years ago. This pretty clearly implies that whatever Ralsei knows about the prophecy was passed down either directly or indirectly by Gaster. In Chapter 1 during the demo days, if you closed the game and reopened it mid-game, you are greeted with a bare-bones menu interface where Gaster seems to react to all of the choices that you make. This menu has been replaced after release of Chapter 2, but the save menu still retains the file naming convention that everything Gaster-related uses. The implication here is straightforward. Unlike in Undertale, here in Deltarune, your ability to save and load is determined completely and totally by Gaster, who is using whatever physical machinery is necessary to complete what you ask of him, in this case, creating and destroying timelines. But that's not the only behind-the-scenes manipulation that Gaster's been up to. If you've been in a Deltarune community for any length of time, you'd quickly realize that Gaster's handprints are all over a set of particularly weird and maniacal characters. And I'm of course referring to Spamton and Jevil. These characters were both contacted by a strange someone who gave them forbidden knowledge that drove them to despair and insanity. In my first video, I suggested that Gaster revealed to them that their choices don't matter. I still mostly stand by that assessment, but I don't think that's the limit of what Gaster told these characters. But that's all we know. There are theories, but this is what we have. This is what we have to work with, and now it's our job to make sense of it all. But where do we even begin? Perhaps a dive into Toby's thought process towards character creation can clear up some of the fog. So, Deltarune obviously isn't a sequel to Undertale. I wouldn't even call it a spiritual successor, since the game is wildly different. Despite this, Undertale is Toby's first complete game, and thus serves as a very good guide towards Toby's thought process. There's one character I want to focus on: Flowey. You actually meet Flowey before you even start the game. He's the one that introduces you to the game on Twitter, and he also appears in a prologue and epilogue. This initially gives Flowey the same role as Gaster. One can even draw parallels between the moment that Flowey tells us it's either kill or be killed, and the moment the vessel gets discarded. What I find really interesting is the fact that Flowey sees the world as a game. He initially tried to be friendly to everyone, but due to his inability to feel any real sense of empathy, the goody two-shoes mask of his began to fall apart, so he became violent to see what would happen. This turns him into the despicable character he's known as. He represents the kind of player who may have gotten super engaged with the game and its world, but after replaying it over and over, slowly became detached. And with this as a basis towards understanding how Toby Fox writes the meta-narrative to his games, we could dive into Deltarune with the same mindset. And with this, I can present a theory that I believe answers a lot of questions community has about Gaster. As Flowey's the representation of a player who has detached themselves from the game and a narrative, Gaster is the representation of a player who has become fully immersed in it and seeks to create his own version of the story where the ending is different. We're both outsiders to Deltarune, us and Gaster, existing outside the boundaries of the world and have some sort of vested interest in seeing our adventure through to the end. I'm certain that the version of Deltarune you play is not the first iteration of the story to happen. The same thing happened before. Chris and Susie enter the closet. Ralsei tells them about the prophecy, and they all go on these cool and amazing Dark World adventures, but without the player's involvement. The roaring happens, and for one reason or another, the heroes are unable to stop or prevent it, and the world is covered in darkness. Why are we so integral to the plot of Deltarune? Why would Gaster need us if our abilities are the same as his own? Unless it has nothing to do with our abilities, but rather our knowledge and the fact that we are separate from this world. I believe the reason Roaring destroyed the last iteration of Deltarune is because of a choice the Lightners made, specifically the failure to banish the Angel's Heaven. The question of what the Angel's Heaven is has been one of the biggest mysteries of the game, but I have an answer that I think works well. The Angel's Heaven is the idea of the entire world existing under the banner of the Dark World. In a previous video, I explained that for a time after the Night creates their ultimate Dark World, humans and monsters will be relatively happy, and the world will have been transformed into a dark world of everyone's dreams, but a world like this won't last for long, because eventually you'll see what's really going on. The world is ending. Titans march onwards from the fountains, destroying everything in their path. This is the fate of the world if the Delta Warriors embrace the darkness. And this is why it's the first thing we see Gaster say in 2016. 3 heroes appeared to banish the Angel's Heaven. It's of utmost importance that the Lightners carry out this final order. By banishing the Angel's Heaven, the 3 Delta Warriors ultimately reject that idea, realizing that a world covered in darkness won't result in a dream world, but instead, inevitably, a world of chaos and destruction plummeted in eternal darkness, where Titans destroy everything people hold so dearly. And to ensure that the Delta Warriors commit to this, Gaster spoke with the various secret bosses of each Dark World, telling them about what happened during the last iteration. However, this knowledge understandably drove these characters to grief and despair, and realizing that this wouldn't be enough to guide the Delta Warriors, Gaster decided to do something else. He decided to create a new Dark World. The castle town is already strange and ghastly, and you already know of Ralsei's connections with Gaster, but the biggest indication is that the Grand Fountain is made of pure darkness. Gaster, which is the character associated with darkness, would likely know the most about how it works, and therefore would probably be the only one capable of making a pure dark fountain, and this makes Ralsei's character somewhat of an enigma. He knows he has a purpose, but the Lightners did something unexpected. They taught him how to think for himself. Suddenly, Ralsei is no longer the mage that teaches the Lightners how to use magic. Now, he's learning to grow beyond himself, even though he knows that he doesn't have a place in a new future that Gaster wishes to create. This honestly makes for a tragic story, but Gaster's story isn't any better, is it? Gaster's motivation as the royal scientist of the underground was to try and free monsters through various means. Soul research, research into darkness, but it failed. His experiments went wrong and he became shattered across time and space. Then he found it, a new world. A world almost identical to that of Undertale, except that the war between humans and monsters never happened. Many of the same people he knew from the underground were living happily on the surface. They were living. They weren't just surviving. And thus, Gaster made an oath. In that very moment, he will do everything he can to protect that world from its own fate. Because despite the world of Deltarune being very different from his own, he still knows these characters, and he cares about them. So when the roaring happens, and the world of Deltarune becomes enveloped in destruction, Gaster takes it upon himself to change fate itself. He creates the castle town and a prophecy, and then he summons the player to the world of Deltarune, allowing us to create a vessel for ourselves, to guide the future Delta Warriors, the same Delta Warriors who resigned the world to eternal darkness in the last iteration of the world. But fate stops him. No one can choose who they are in this world. I think it would be really fitting if the voice that discards the vessel is the angel. The angel in this case would represent fate. The angel's duty is to prevent the world from being altered. If Gaster is metaphorically writing fan fiction by bringing us to the world of Deltarune and introducing a prophecy, the angel is the original author, attempting to circumvent Gaster from changing the ending. Thus, when's all said and done, when we inevitably reach the world's edge, the crossroads of light and dark, in fiction and reality, we will be presented yet again with a choice: continue dreaming, or to banish the angel's heaven and awaken to reality. And when we do, fate will descend upon us like a hammer. We will end up in a fight with the angel themselves, potentially using Noelle as a vessel due to the angel's symbolism regarding her, as well as the Titans, in a battle that will likely be extremely climactic and difficult. Will the Delta Warriors win? That depends entirely upon whether the game's choice theme exists as a concrete rule, or if it exists to be subverted like Flowey's kill or be killed message. Personally, I think Deltarune's ending will be bittersweet. The Dark World will likely cease to exist. This means that all the Darkners, including Ralsei, will die. But also the game ends with a somewhat hopeful atmosphere, with a knowledge that something like this can never happen again. And right at the end of it all, right after we say our goodbyes to everyone, we will come face to face with Gaster yet again. again, who will give us final goodbye message, where he says that he's glad that we did what we did, and that it's time for the both of us to go our separate ways. Afterwards, we are permanently disconnected from the world of Deltarune, and we are unable to access our save file. We can't delete it, and we can't copy it. That's my theory. That's the theory I wanted to tell you for nearly 2 months. I've spent a while developing this theory and talking it over with others, and in fact, the original idea about Deltarune being Gaster's fix-it fic isn't even mine, but rather the work of 3 other theorists, who will be linked to in the credits. It was an absolute blast writing this, even though admittedly this theory takes a lot of insane leaps in certain places, especially towards the end. But even if I'm wrong about this theory, I think it has the potential to completely shift the tone about Gaster's theories. Anyway, I'll see you all next time. If you have any theories of your own, please feel free to share them in the comments. I'm planning on rating all your theories in a future video.